and then we'll see what you have to say. So I'm going to skip things like my principal's great, so and so's great with the kids, or so and so's knows all the parents, because it's not something we can really replicate. So first practice, and what I'd love, I'm going to talk about this a little bit, and I'd love for folks to jump in and talk a little bit more about it. So one thing we've heard from a few different schools, and for those that are just joining and may have missed the intro spiel here, we're looking at practices in schools that can promote core academic outcomes among students with disabilities and multi-language learners that are in CTE programs. So one thing we've heard from a few programs is that they're able to provide some kind of an intro course for all grade 9 students, regardless of student. So this allows kids to get an exposure to the different CTE programs. They get to see which ones are a good fit. Teachers get to see which students might be a good fit. They can set expectations, clarify misconceptions about what these programs are, and then try to match students to programs that they might enjoy. And this, this is for all students, but it includes students that are with disabilities and multi-language learners as well. For folks that we spoke with in this initial sample of 6 schools, they reported that student motivation is higher. The fit means that they're enjoying their programs, and they can, the kind of core academic success is generalizable. I'm not able to poll, but what I'd love to hear from folks just in the chat, is this something you're already doing? So just chat yes, chat no. There's probably subtlety. There was going to be some subtlety in some of the kind of the polling, but I'd love to just hear, like, is this something everyone's doing already? So we shouldn't be looking at this as a best practice. And while you're chatting, I'd love to hear, I'd love to hear from others about, if this is something you do, if this is something you can't do, or any other feedback or thoughts about this sort of an approach. And I'll pause there. Thanks, Christiane. I see that you're mentioning this, not done in every school and depends on the size of school. Would anybody be willing to share who is able to do this sort of, some of the benefits that you see, or the way in which this is, the way that this is, it may or may not be effective?
Can you repeat the question a little bit? What you're asking us, whether our school specifically caters programs to students with disabilities, or if they're specifically offering a specific course? I'm unclear of the question.
Great point. Thank you. Yeah. I guess the question is, I guess this phrase here, intro course, is very vague. From some of the schools we talked with, there's 2 examples. So in one, it was a school that had 2 different CTE programs, and all 9th grade students, including students with disabilities and multi-language learners, were required to take the course, and that course specifically was a precursor to both programs. So anyone now has the first course in the track, and then they can move on. And so they've now been part of it. They can see what they're signing up for, and it's a much more applied sort of exposure to what the rest of their experience would be. And the schools felt that this was an effective way to make sure that it's a good match between kids and program. So that's the question. Who is able to offer that? And do you agree that this is an effective way of actually supporting students with disabilities and multi-language learners? Thanks, Chrisanne, for translating. So it seems like, again, I'm getting 4 or 5 folks that are able to offer this. Would anybody be willing to sort of share whether this is actually something that they believe is specifically effective for supporting students with disabilities and multi-language learners?
with our school, we have been trying to do this for every year, and the more information we find is better that we can give the students, but we still find it a little bit on the difficult side in where we only offer 3 different courses that to match them up in a way that they're going to be more successful. We tend to have the computer programming side, which, you know, it's the networking and building computers. And then we have the side that the kids that don't really want to do that stuff, we get them in the graphics program. And so we're always getting this comment that, well, I'm not really going to go into this in real life. And that includes there with the with, you know, the special needs kids as well as with the regular kids.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Anybody else have thoughts or feedback or questions to kind of put to the group? Chrisanne, if you have anything to kind of expand on some of the comments you've made in the chat, I would take that as well.
Sure. And again, just to make sure that everyone is clear, it is for the opportunity for students to take those exploratory courses as part of a foundation. In some schools, once a student chooses a CTE program of study, they do not have the option to switch to a different CTE program of study or track. So some schools use that 9th grade exploratory time, even up into the 10th grade, to allow students to participate in those foundational courses or expose them to each of the various CTE tracks so that students can make a better match. We all know that that matching process begins before students even enter high school with the high school admissions process, and that process doesn't directly correlate with the CTE program of study. School may only have one admissions program by which all students enter. It may or may not have been the student's first choice school. And I think we're also just looking for feedback. What if you are one of the teachers who teaches in this exploratory course? We always say that one of the benefits of CTE is you give students an opportunity to try on what this career identity might be like. They might be able to make a more informed decision and decide, you know what, I don't want to go into construction trades. This experience was not what I thought it would be, or this culinary program was not what I thought it would be. I actually don't want to do this. I would rather go into business. And so just, again, I think any and every opportunity to provide for students an opportunity to make choices and to better understand their career pathways and what information is shared during those times is critical.
So I teach at the High School of Art and Design. One of my colleagues, James Harrington, is the one who wrote about our foundation program. James teaches illustration. I teach film production. But the way the curriculum is set up is that in the freshman year, they have a foundation arts course. And they're basically learning the elements of design, just principles, composition, just the basic foundations. But in that foundational course, they get to kind of explore every major a little bit. And we're finding, for example, if kids apply to our school for filmmaking, which I'm one of the film teachers, we now have a foundation course that still teaches them those foundational skills, but with a filmmaking bent so that they're looking at samples of films and seeing things like that. The advantage of this foundational course not only introduces them to very important elements that they need regardless of which specific art major they go into, but the other advantage is that they get a little bit of a taste of each major and what it would be like. A lot of kids apply for one major, but after taking the foundational course and speaking to other students and kind of hearing and seeing the projects that are being done, by the time sophomore year happens and they actually have to choose their major, a lot of times they choose a different major. I think that specifically in the subject that I teach in filmmaking, it lends itself extremely well to students with disabilities and multi-language learners because there are multiple access points. They're learning everything through projects. Everything is kinesthetic, hands-on. They're learning visually. They're learning by every theoretical concept is applied through a project. They're interacting with each other. So a lot of the art majors are very well geared to students with disabilities.
Thanks so much for sharing. There's a question in the chat about whether you have support services during these exploratory courses for these students that might have disabilities or for multi-language learners.
Well, I know that students with disabilities might have, separate, meetings with other teachers that are helping them with disabilities. But in terms of specifically choosing the major, I'm not aware of in terms of something that helps them decide. Having said that, again, if I have a student who has some kind of disability, that for me is not what defines the student. For me, it's just we're doing the project, and if the student is struggling in some way, I'll find another way to have them be successful. But I found that many of my most successful students are students with disabilities, and they thrive. So I'm not exactly sure by the question. You mean somebody who takes them aside and says, considering you have this disability, what major would work best for you? Is that what you're asking? Or?
Well, Hanan, I think I'd just like to add that, students with disabilities often have like a para or school aide that work with them throughout the day, but they do not come to our classes most of the time. Most of the time, our classes are an exception, and they don't have the support in our classes.
Correct. That's right. Thank you, James.
Does anybody else want to share an experience or an approach that you're using for these sort of foundation courses as a way to specifically support or create a strong match for students with disabilities and learners, and else? Oops. All right, I'm going to go to I suspect, these general broad themes might be vague for the group, and we may need to get quickly to sort of an open discussion of very specific practices. But the common themes from folks we spoke to are the things that everybody is mentioning. And as I said in the beginning, it could be that these are common practices that everybody does, or that there are limitations preventing folks from doing the ones that, that others are doing. Anyways, these two specific related practices that we've heard are using sort of the specifically a formal commitment reflected in schools' core values to kind of reinforce two practices that can kind of guide instruction, guide strategy, and guide every other piece. So one is just a formal commitment to including being inclusive with students, reflected and reinforced in the core values, reinforced and included into regular meetings, and then that filters into practices and guides decisions. Similarly, schools reported having either through external grants or specific funding, a formal commitment to reinforce core skills across subjects. So again, included in the school's core values, reinforced through the core values, to use CTE content in core courses to teach skills, or to teach core skills like writing in CTE courses. These are two specific commitments / integrations throughout meeting structures and the school's core values that were reported by a number of places. So again, in the chat, I mean, I'm bringing these things up to kind of get a sense of like, is this what everybody does, or is this something that could be expanded? And if anyone kind of can also talk through a little bit how they think these sort of formal commitments or integration into the school's core values can help drive the outcomes that we talked about earlier. And again, thanks for folks posting in the chat. You don't need to, much to my chagrin, don't need to be speaking out. Okay, thank you for your comments in the chat.
I have a comment.
Please.
I'm from Food and Finance High School in Manhattan, and I just mentioned that we do have a policy of emphasizing soft skills. We do a monthly soft skill that we try to emphasize in all of our core classes, as well as my class. I teach physical education, and I was interested in this seminar because we do have quite a few ELLs, English language learners, as well as students with disabilities. So this is really, I think, a great topic that you're hosting today, and we appreciate it.
Thanks. Yeah, and thanks for sharing. Does anybody want to, follow up on that? And also going back to my kind of framing slide, is there any evidence or anecdotes that you can share? We don't have data to show that something like this, like a formal commitment or this kind of integration, directly drives outcomes. People theoretically say it, but if we have data from other schools, we can start to build a case for specifically how to do this and how to implement it. So I'd love to hear from folks who also, taken this kind of approach, and to hear some specifics about how you do it, and if there's anything you can share to show, some kind of evidence that it's having an impact. I'll go on and do a couple more and then see if other people have anything else to share. So this is another one that I suspect is a fairly common practice, but when we talked to the schools that were part of our initial conversations, they discussed, structuring grade-based team meetings, and some also you kind of taking a small learning community approach as hugely beneficial for these students. So, meeting as a grade, including CTE and paras and other support staff in meetings, was allowing people to sort of track students who are falling behind, comparing what works for individual students. And also something that we heard was just like this allowed the team to leverage teachers with the best relationship to support kids who needed some kind of whatever support they needed. So, having these kinds of grade-based conversations and learning who has relationships with the different students allowed for, more informal interventions for a kid who needed extra support, because everybody knew who the best person to go to reach a certain kid. So again, if y'all don't mind, in the chat, is this something you do? Is this one of those practices that everybody's doing, or is this something that there's room to sort of to experiment and to play with some different structures?
Again, I don't know what happens at other schools, but in our school, this is absolutely standard policy. So I would say about 20% of my students are students with disabilities, and we are required as teachers to be not only aware of which students those are, but to have gone on CSIS and reviewed their IEPs to know what kind of extended time or what kind of extra resources they might get. And then we are also asked then for these meetings that you're describing to give written feedback as to where the student is struggling, where they're succeeding. And we're also many times asked to attend those meetings in person as well, as long as we're free that period. So that does happen on a regular basis for all students with IEPs. But I want to echo what James Harrington, my colleague, is writing in here, that our whole school culture is that everyone can achieve. And one of the things that is really key is that I never create some special thing in my class just for kids with IEPs. Everyone is just mixed together and working. So I'm wondering if some kind of a formalized, I'm not sure what kind of specific course you're suggesting, but anything that would be specifically there for kids with IEPs, I'm wondering if that might make the student feel more alienated. It's really kind of never talked about in class about, IEPs. It's just kind of, we're privately invited to those meetings sometimes, but in class, every student is a successful student.
Thank you. I appreciate putting some actual, context to some of the kind of broad practices I mentioned earlier. Anybody else want to share anything related to was just mentioned, or the kind of practices we've discussed so far?
To piggyback on what my colleague, well, my name is Gerald Rabel. I'm from the High School of Art and Design. To piggyback on what my colleague said as to the SWD student, we, on every lesson, I think it is embedded in every lesson that the lesson is broken into section that can cater to the student with the needs, with different needs. But in our school, we don't particular, do a lesson just for the IEP student. But in every lesson, it is embedded in the lesson as to the best way to help student with disability, if it's learning or any type of disability, to catch up with the other student in the classroom.
Yeah, the differentiated instruction section has to be in every lesson plan that we have.
And how do you all embed? How do you embed effectively? Like, how do you approach that so that you're not, as someone mentioned, singling out a specific student, but making it so that, to do exactly what you just said?
Well, for me, I teach architecture. Every project is broken into different section, so that a student can, for example, a student can do an activity in 1 period or 2 periods, whereas the activity is broken into many different steps that would allow a student with disability to finish the activity or the project.
And in my class, I teach filmmaking again. First of all, in our lesson plans, we have one section that's called criteria for success, which is how the student is supposed to gauge for themselves whether they're grasping the concept. And in those criteria for success, it's supposed to be scaffolded. So the first is just the basic understanding of the concepts, and then it goes more and more metacognitive as it increases. And then the other way is through group work. So what ends up happening, students learn much better from each other than they do just from the teacher. So the students are reinforcing the information to each other. And again, through multiple access points. If they're operating the camera, some students will be better in just the tactile operation of it. Some students will get it through, through visual learning, through auditory oral learning. But the main thing is project-based, and where students are able to learn from each other. And then even in the last stage where kids are editing and post-production, every student gets his or her own computer, but we sit the students in the group next to each other so they can end up learning from each other. And this is very, very empowering to students with disabilities because they quickly discover the area where they can shine. And then they feel like they're really contributing to the group. They don't feel like they're just being talked down to. They feel like they're helping to make something wonderful that's their own. So it really is about empowering the student. So we scaffold the instruction, we scaffold the theory. When we're asking questions, we're supposed to have DOK 3 and 4 questions that end up forcing the kids to think metacognitively, but they're also level 1 and 2 questions. So we ask the range of questions, there are the range of activities involved, and every student can enter in at what the projects are structured in a way that every student can enter in where they best can connect.
Thank you. I really appreciate that example. I'm wondering if other folks in different program focuses, how do you make the same kind of adaptation, or how do you make the same approach in like a non-arts based sort of program? Are there unique challenges to some of the programs that y'all are running out there that you have questions for the group here about how to take some kind of the principles that were just discussed to your specific program? And Chrisanne, I'm noticing that you're putting some very specific questions in the chat. Would you like to call one of those to the floor and see if people have specific feedback?
Sure, I'm just giving examples to try to prompt discussion. Having been a CTE teacher myself, having had L students in my classroom, new to the country, found it very challenging. Even when you differentiate, you sometimes have to rely on their peers to help support, simply because you may or may not have the depth of knowledge of a particular language to help convey meaning to the student in your room, especially if schools are not resourced in such a way for a CTE, which is an elective class, to have a paraprofessional with that student to help even interpret your lessons. You can use Google Translate to support L learners, and that does or doesn't always help. I agree with Hanan about the project-based learning. Just also looking for, what are those things that make it possible for students to succeed. Like I said, I often had to rely on some of the support from group work and helping students with language barriers. Aside from that, asking the questions, translating the questions. If that student also had an IEP, understanding what specific accommodations or modifications he or she might need. So just wondering if any of you have had specific examples where maybe it was very difficult, and where did you seek resources, or how did you find a way, whether that was accessing resources that the school provides, talking to counselors. What do you do for a student in your class that's falling behind, that may be a student with disabilities or L or ML student?
So Chrisanne mentioned one thing that reminded me of another thing that I do in my class, is that I might pair a student up with a mentor student in the class, and they end up working with them side by side to help them kind of catch up. The one challenge there is making sure that the student who understands the concepts or is able to do the concepts, making sure that they don't do the work for the other student. That's really key. So it has to be monitored. You can't just assign them and just leave them be. You have to watch and make sure that it's when a student is showing another student how to edit, that they're not grabbing the mouse and editing for them. So, that's one of the key things. But mentorship and partnering kids up with each other is, in addition to the group work, is I found to be very, very helpful.
Thanks, Hanan. Anybody else have anything they want to share? I'm gonna skip quickly here because it feels kind of broad, but another common theme that folks mention, again, kind of going back to this commitment thing, is that a lot of training, professional development, and purposeful attention to keeping up on writing IEPs and implementing IEPs, consistent training, workshops every year, and teaching where possible. I'm not going to dig into this because I think we've covered a lot of this kind of stuff. But what I want to do is open it up a little before pitching some kind of future involvement if people would be interested, and then we can wrap up. So what are some other things that you have found or that your school is implementing that is effective in supporting students with disabilities and Ls in CTE programs? I'd love to hear anything or see any chats there. A strategy, a way that you organize your team, a way that you specifically organize pedagogy. Anything at all that you can think of that's been effective, I'd love to hear them and see if others have questions about it. I'll move on to this. I mentioned in the beginning that the original goal of this project was to identify these quote exemplary programs and hear what they're working on and share with the group all of these the practices that are common. We have found some of that, and but we, as I mentioned in the beginning, we suspect that the way the state is using this data may be underrepresenting schools out there that are doing great work. So this is what I'd like to ask, if you're willing. This presentation was initially conceived 2 months ago as reporting what the field is doing, giving everybody ideas for the best way to approach this. Instead, we decided this should be a call for folks who are interested in sharing what they're doing to do so. And I want to know what the best way how we can do that. So, are folks willing to join a small group conversation down the line, a half-hour talk with either your school team to talk about the questions you have or the strategies you're using, or perhaps a small group that meets a couple of times to kind of talk through specific issues. I'd love to hear in the chat, or you can mention it. Is this something you'd be willing to do? Are there already working groups out there that are tackling this, that we can kind of tap into and hear what feedback other folks are doing? And then if you're willing to potentially participate, you can sign up here. You can give specific feedback about how we should collect information from schools, etc. So I'll pause for a moment to see if anybody has some ideas for us about how we can stay in touch, how we can include you in additional feedback. Our goal is to learn from everybody, so we really want to hear from folks. What's the best way to do that? If you'd rather, let us know through this forum, please click there. You can share. You can also email me specifically here. If you'd like to sign up for another conversation to kind of keep things going, we'll probably organize them on more specific topics than this sort of general, what's everybody doing? I had a colleague that said teamwork is the dream work at one point. So I'm very, very familiar with the teamwork makes the dream work comment. Thanks, William. I think I'm going to just leave it out there. If folks have any feedback they want to share, I'd love to hear it. Love to hear it in the chat. You can go ahead and click the link. But if folks don't have specific feedback to there, we'll give you a little bit of time back, or you can join the end of another session. Chrisanne, is there any other questions that you want to ask before we let folks go a little early?
No questions on my end. What I will say is that, this is the beginning of some research that we had asked Gerad to do for us because we were very curious ourselves what's actually happening across all CTE programs, across all boroughs. How many students are we serving in these special populations? And are they being underserved in any ways? And so that really became the impetus behind this work, Perkins driving some of this with their target levels so that we can also give feedback to the state. I think just as Gerard pointed out, the data doesn't always tell the story that everyone believes that it does on the surface. And so digging a little bit deeper and better understanding the data that we have locally in our city helps us to understand. We happen to have very large populations of students with special needs and L and ML students, but the enrollment across the city may be a smaller percentage than folks think, program by program, school by school. So our office will continue to do this work. We will continue to dig into the data. We are working across the other central offices that support the Division of Multilingual Learners and those that work with the special education office inside their division. We're looking to them to find out what is the current research, how can we bring that back to our CTE schools and programs so that we are supporting or strengthening the instruction and the outcomes for those students. We know that the outcomes for these students vary in terms of their success beyond high school, beyond their CTE programs of study, what their graduation outcomes look like, what it looks like for them to be persistent in post-secondary education. And so really those are our concerns, is setting them up for success, not only in your CTE classrooms, but so that they can have a successful life beyond high school. And really that's the ultimate goal as we align those efforts. So we want to thank everyone for your time today and for your feedback. If you have feedback in the future, Again, we'll be coming back to you with some more findings as we continue to do this work and dig a little bit deeper. So thank you, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the day.
Roseanne, I did have one final suggestion now that you were speaking about this, and that's that so many of the art teachers are able to connect and have the students with disabilities feel so empowered in their classes. And I'm wondering if there's some way for the people who are writing the IEPs and doing all of this work and maybe connecting with the academic teachers, if they can somehow be a bridge in gleaning some tactics that are used in the art classes where the students with disabilities are really thriving, and then apply some of those techniques, such as project-based learning and things like that, to the academic classes. I feel like we're all asked to give feedback to the people who are collecting data on writing the IEP, but I don't feel like there is a bridge being made where the academic teachers might see why specifically the student is so successful in the art class and might be struggling so much in the academic class, and see if we can learn from each other. That's one area that I think could be developed more. All right.
Thanks, Hanan. That's a great note. We'll pick that up in the conversation here and integrate it into sort of the other feedback that we're getting. So thank you.
Okay. So is that it? We're leaving now, or?
That's it for us, y'all. If you have no other things to mention, please add into the survey in the form, and thanks for coming by. Thanks for jumping in, Christina. I'm looking now to just make sure I can save this chat.
Oh, I saved it already, so we're good. I exported it. I have it as a PDF file.
Yes. Thank you.
We're good there. Yep, absolutely.
Um,
And thank you. I mean, just your opening part of the presentation was very helpful to kind of set the context for the use of the data and what it shows, even just from that high level.
oh, good. Yeah, I'm glad. You know, it's. Yeah, I'm going to.
Yeah, I'll upload that file if I can right here, and I'm going to share it with Samantha as well.
Perfect. Awesome. And then I'm going to stop the recording, which should automatically save it to the cloud.
Mhm.